Hello, and welcome to another session of FortiGuard Live. I'm Derek Manky, and joining me, as always, is Aamir Lakhani. How you doing, Aamir?
I'm always great, always looking forward to talking about Tourette's and how they're running wild, just like my favorite 80s wrestler, always running wild.
I see him up in the background behind you. Maybe that's someone else. Yeah, welcome. It's good to talk to you again. Obviously, there's in any given week a ton of developments that happen, as you say, in terms of threats running wild. Not even just every given week; it's any given hour. It seems nowadays just gets more fast, more furious. The attack surface is growing. We've talked about in the past things like offensive automation and the weaponization of machine learning and artificial intelligence, and we continue to see more volume, but shifts in this, right? And one of the things that we had talked about in the past, tracking COVID lures as an example, just to give a quick update on that. Obviously, it was front and center in terms of fresh new campaigns we saw in Q2, specifically in April, May. A lot of these lures were targeted towards, the initial layoff notices that were happening to some employees, things like, purchase orders that were going through, messages from HR, health authority updates. In our trackers, those have dropped down quite a bit. I mean, we're going from 250 on average a day down to single digits now on the weekend to about 20 on average per day. So it seems like attackers, now that we're entering into Q4 and into the fall here in the northern hemisphere, we're seeing the traditional kickoff to a lot of things like conferences now that are happening. A lot of organizations have shifted gear and they're shifting into a higher gear now, trying to make some lost revenue back, as an example. There's more hiring that's happening. Economy's being stimulated. And we're seeing that the shift from lures going from just all the things I talked about to things like foreign work programs that are being set up, and also job hiring notices. And it's interesting because our labs picked up some hijacks, right? So these are business email compromise where attackers are going and actually intercepting, sort of man in the middle of these email threads for job candidates and offers, and injecting malicious resumes, PDFs as an example. So something interesting to see. And I know you've been also tracking threats based on universities as well too, right?
No, absolutely right. At first, I thought maybe attackers were just getting tired of all the attacks that they were doing, but they've just changed focus. They've just gone right towards where everyone else is going towards, right where the need is. For example, as you said, now it's less about information around the pandemic and more about, hey, what can you do if your job was affected about this? What can you do, if you're remote learning? What can you do, if you're trying to make ends meet and you need some government assistance? So attackers know what's what people are really emotional about, and they're taking advantage of those emotions. As you said, Derek, one interesting thing is that as everyone, especially here in the US, is doing, where I'm from, everyone's doing remote learning for the schools. We're seeing a lot of attacks in school districts, denial of service attacks, especially on the dark net, especially in email campaigns and denial of service attacks. They're saying hey, disrupt these businesses and perhaps hold them as ransom.
Yeah, it's a good point. So I think if history has taught us one lesson, as you said, with cyber criminals, is that they're always going to jump on the freshest opportunity that they see, obviously with no ethics on their end. Q4 again means back to work for a lot of people after summer vacations, but also back to school. and especially now and that's been a major shift for education, right? I mean, some institutions were already set up for remote learning possibilities, but if you look at K-12 and you look at a majority of other education in academia, a lot of them are just, this is new to them, right? They're using new platforms, they're going to new setups. There's a lot more connections that are happening, just like we've had from the telework from home presence. So education is a huge part of that.
It is, and it's almost a perfect perfect setup for attackers, because the way schools are operating is a lot of hybrid learning. It really means that a lot of teachers are coming into a school itself, and they may be teaching a class, then they may be doing remote learning. So all the teachers are at one location. So all an attacker has to do is attack that one location. They don't have to find every teacher and their own internet connections. They're not attacking a cloud platform, which probably would be more resilient. They're attacking the internet connection coming directly into that one specific school. And of course, they're targeting multiple schools.
Yeah, absolutely. And, just kind of refreshing on one thing we left our last conversation on was the usage of RDP as an example. We say that there's a lot of systems that are now publicly exposed. Right? We have RDP services that are publicly exposed. And going back to the days of big worms that we saw in the past, like WannaCry as an example, these were leveraging this fact, right, that there were public ports exposed for RDP. And it's something we've always talked about. This just shouldn't be happening, but we continue to see happen. And I think that's also a concern, not just RDP, but other remote desktop applications when it comes to education too, especially, right? Just something from a security architecture standpoint, I think that needs to be addressed. It's an easy way for attackers to, especially if they're hijacking sessions, to try to get into these networks, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So RDP, Microsoft Remote Desktop Protocol, as well as a lot of other remote desktop protocols everyone's using. I remember just a couple of days ago, I think I did a search on Shodan to see how many publicly available RDP ports were indexed on the internet, and I think worldwide there was like a little over 4 million. I remember looking last year, and I used to usually consistently get around 2 million. So we've definitely seen an increase in RDP connections that are out there. And then of course, like old exploits, what they do is they exploit RDP, like exploit ports like SMB and other types of ports where people are using RDP as a transport method to like push through ransomware. And so they're exploiting RDP, pushing through ransomware. And at that point, most RDP connections are on the networks. They may be servers or very critical boxes, and attackers win.
Yeah, and I still think the industry is suffering from these growing pains, right? Because this is a big growth right now mechanism when it comes to adopting things that distributed enterprise has done for a while in the past as an example, but now having education going towards this, other organizations going to way more endpoint nodes that are now connected to them, and the natural, the path of least resistance and the easy way is to go through these open ports, right? It's an easy connection. You can get into systems. There's less things that could go wrong if you don't have it properly set up. But of course, in reality, as we know, there's more things that can go wrong. Because these are exposed and attacks can happen. And you're talking about, especially when these are into unsegmented networks or you're not running over VPNs, the risk is huge. I mean, we've talked about Ponemon Institute average cost of data breaches, exceeding $4 million US. I know there's the targeted ransom attacks that we talked about that are, in even larger numbers, right? In terms of damages, even cyber insurance policies that have to be taken out to these now too. And so, yeah, if we look at the attack opportunities that are happening with this, especially given that these exploits on RDP and other, you mentioned SMB as well, a majority of them are still quite old, right? 2 years plus old. This just shouldn't be happening.
It really shouldn't. It makes me think like how the insurance, industry will change for cyber insurance, as well as if you think about even health insurance, like how COVID has really affected and probably created a new norm on what the normal should be, what the normal spending should be. So especially when you look at cyber attacks and how there's such an increase in attack footprint that's available to hackers, how will that really affect policy and compliance and all these other things that we normally hadn't really had to think about in such a deep way.
Yeah, that's true. And this is, again, where our world of threat intelligence with FortiGuard Labs really comes into play, right? I mean, we always say you can only protect against what you can see. And I think in the past, a lot of these attacks were not seen. I mean, there's a lot of persistence that was happening, stealth and visibility. Organizations that, again, didn't have proper inspection or management to a lot of this traffic flow. RDP is a good example of it. right? So I think that's another key point, critical now when it comes to education that's happening, is really getting for those, business critical applications, how are they secured, segmented? What's the traffic that going over them as well? These are things, again, that can lead to critical losses. And when it comes to management as well, there's not a lot of visibility on it, right? I mean, now it's becoming a board level discussion, as we know, but I think having that visibility to these threats, and we track it every day with FortiGuard Labs Intelligence, is really key.
Yeah, no, visibility is a key, especially these days when most traffic is encrypted. So if you just put in like a regular firewall or like devices that are not capable at high speeds of actually doing deep packet inspections, you're not seeing anything. By far, the majority of traffic these days is encrypted. Even think about most of the websites you go to. A lot of mainstream websites these days, they're all HTTPS. None of them really have HTTP anymore. You get that big error message on a lot of the web browsers as well. And because of that, you need the capability of like opening up those packets up, looking at them at high speed, playing around with all the computing power encryption and decryption takes, and being able to apply the proper policies as well as application inspections on them.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's going to be really interesting to follow this. I believe that the next 2 to 3 months are going to be quite critical in the world of cybersecurity. I mean, it's always critical, but especially now, I think, because there are a lot of these wheels in motion, and it's really that time to set up that foundation, because as we said, this is the new normal that we're entering into. So it's going to be interesting to follow that. I mean, we talked about education today. That's obviously a key area. And I think in the future, we will be talking more about other critical areas like operational technology, as an example. Healthcare is a big part of that, but other aspects of OT as we move into more integrations, 5G, all these sorts of things as well. Again, if you look at the trackers that we set up with our FortiGuard Labs sensors, we're seeing, we talk about huge numbers, right? I mean, over 100 billion potential threat events a day. Majority of those are web driven now, right? That was a big shift. I mean, obviously email has always been dominant, but now we're also seeing a lot of the web-based threats. That also coincides with these endpoints and a lot of that web traffic that's flowing from outside of these, corporate or educational safeguards data centers that were set up.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I think, as I always like to say, we're in a brave new world, to quote a title of one of my favorite books.
Absolutely. But there's always good news. I mean, the good thing is we got scope and visibility on this. I think a lot of people in the industry are in the security industry, are obviously doing a good job in terms of education now. People are waking up to this more. So that's the good news. I think it's a good opportunity for everybody to, especially in the next 2 to 3 months, expect this big wave of attacks that are coming up too. We will keep you updated on that. Thanks again, Aamir, for your time as always.
Always great being here with you, man.
Yeah, you too. Look forward to the next conversation. This is Derek Manky with FortiGuard Live signing off.